Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Payment Ecosystem Podcast with Cashfree. I'm your host Shiladitya, and today we've got with us two extremely interesting guests from Cashfree again. You could say on this episode I'm traveling back in time because these two folks are, from very early days in the company, and I'm going to be talking to them about some of the very early stories and how it was like, life at Cashfree in the early days. So I'm excited to introduce to you Joe Dominic and Punit Pawan. Joe works as the associate architect at Cashfree Payments and boasts of being one of the famous first five at Cashfree Payments. And Punit Pawan, one of the founding members of the team and now AVP of Strategic Initiatives. It's great to have both of them on this show. Let's welcome them here and jump right in. Hey, hi Joe, hi Puneet. Welcome to yet another episode of the Payment Ecosystem Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hey
Thanks for
Shraddha,
having
hi.
us.
Good evening. Hi.
No, thanks so much for joining. To welcome to both of you. And we've been doing this series as a payment ecosystem podcast with Cashfree, and we've had a lot of folks who've already spoken to us on the show. But today, I think I'm privileged to have both of you who have been very early people in Cashfree, particularly, and you've sort of seen the very early days when the company was really a startup in itself and in the payment ecosystem as a whole, right? Because given the fact that you guys have been early players, I'm keen to understand a little bit of your own personal journeys, just for everyone listening today, as to what sort of led you to join the company. What were you doing before this? What was what was your thought coming in when you made the call to jump on board a very small startup with who knows what in its future. So why don't I ask you, Joe, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. So I think it all started with. Previously I was working with Target as a senior engineer there. So I think the whole workflow of how an enterprise work, and then I think at that point in time, startups were booming, and I wanted to sort of experience and build out uh, products which are going to like facilitate customers as a whole. And then I was looking out for opportunities that sort of facilitated from that point of view. And then I sort of reached out and saw many posts regarding Cashree. Like one of the earlier members was my colleague from college mate from college. So I reached out, and then he
Nice.
sort of introduced me, and that is how I got into Cashree. So it was its own referral program in that standpoint, sort of making it me reach out. And then I met with Akash, and then I was super amazed with what we are sort of building here. And then I mean, it was all from the standpoint that how all these people were able to do this in a very collaborative manner, and how easy it was to talk to these people, right? You more or less worked in an enterprise environment where things are more or less, you do less of the talking and just get things done, and then that sort of. But here the bonding, how things worked and how it was easy to do, was very overwhelming and I mean, I found it very nice to actually work, and nice to actually see. And I mean, that is how I started here in Cashree.
Nice. Puneet, I mean, again, being a founding member, what was your journey like?
So I have a very interesting story there. So before joining Cashfree, I was working with PayU. So I was based out of Gurgaon. I worked there for almost a year there. But interestingly, what happened that while being there for a year, I did realize that the kind of opportunity that payments provides, and there were just handful of big startups, or even for that much startups out of India, the
Mhm.
likes of Flipkarts and Ola was just beginning. So that was the time that somehow I really felt that payments is something which I still truly believe is going to be the core and the sun of the entire startup ecosystem in India. and
Mhm.
and I decided to start something on my own, and I quit PayU and I started working on something on an NFC. And I guess probably I was early then, but then what happened, 3 4 months I was back in my hometown. The only challenge that I was going through, that I didn't have a team there. and I come
Mhm.
from a small place in Bihar. So then eventually, I used to read about startup stories, and then one day I went through an article which mentioned about Cashfree and our co-founders Akash and Riju. And just it happened that I reached out to them very. I didn't know any one of them. I reached out to them very coldly on LinkedIn. I pinged both of them, and within 2 days we had couple of discussions, and within a week I decided that I'll come to Bangalore and see what happens. But yeah,
Nice.
one thing that I was very sure that I did feel during my first few interactions itself that these are people with the right kind of passion, and they have the determination and very complementary skill set the three of us possessed. And yeah, I think I'm glad I made that decision.
Oh, very nice. And both of you have given me more or less a similar sort of story, right? That one, of course, Puneet, maybe you were already into payments, but when you met the team, you immediately sort of got that conviction that this is the place to be. Joe, you said the same thing. Uh, so it was clear that Cashree was onto something even in the early days, even as the payment ecosystem had not fully formed. Uh, Taking it to the next step, like what was, let's say, after that initial conviction, meeting the founders, once you guys both started, what was that initial phase like? It must have been, again, like any other startup which is in its super early days, chaotic. Even with high ambition, there's a lot of chaos. So Puneet, to continue the story, like what, tell us a little bit about the early days of once you did, let's say, make the move to Bangalore.
Sure. So I think once I moved here, right, the initial first couple of months were largely around that what do we really want to do, right, and what do we really want to become eventually, and more than that, the core thought that we had, that what are we going to solve for in the market, right? What do businesses really need in India? And that was the time when all of us, what we realized, that payment processing or the collection part was something that most payment players at that point of time were doing, right? All the big names were
Yeah.
doing the same, but no one was really solving for what happens after that. Like, say for example, consider a scenario where e-commerce website collects payment, but they also have to process refunds. Who will take care of that part? Who will work to make the end customer experience better, right? Or if there is you know a large B2B player in the e-commerce itself, for example, and they have to process vendor payouts, or a cab riding
Mm.
platforms like Uber and Ola, who would automate their payouts to their rider partners frequently, right? And that is when we thought that that's more than an opportunity, that's something that's really really needed. And I think the good part for us was being one of the early startups in this space at that point of time. We could actually look at this very holistically, and
Mm.
luckily for us, we had the time and the bandwidth to think about remanaging payments at that point of time. And that is where, if you see that payouts kind of a product that we launched, which became a flagship in the market. And the biggest, I think, testament is that probably every other payments player now starts, and they do offer a similar product. That
Right.
just means that market needed that, and good that
Right.
we were the first one to eventually start with that.
No, very nice. Joe, on the same note, like what are some of these early sort of light bulb moments, or maybe, breakthroughs that you saw once you came on board?
So I think it was to realize the fact that for me, I came from a very different background from a domain
Right.
standpoint, right? To really understand the fact that how payments actually work, right? So I mean, and to understand what sort of pain points do customers have to deal with, like what Puneet actually touched upon, right? So how do you handle, say, refunds or cashbacks, or like offline workflows? How do you even sort of solve that, right? So so there was a point when you always used to think from a product standpoint, what can we do, right? And you used to have 10 or 100 items in your backlog that you can actually do. That sort of set out
Yeah.
that fact that there are a lot of problems from the payment ecosystem itself that needed to be solved, right? So it sort of started from the fact that, so, and the whole engineering aspect around that, right? How simple it was to actually start out with something and actually see, right? So we always think from an engineering perspective, these are very complicated problems to actually solve. I mean, you could actually solve it in a very simple manner to start out, and that's you would be amazed with what sort of basic things we had set up, and that's how things were driven from that standpoint. I mean, you would be like amazed by like, oh, so many people are handling so many payments in the business. I mean, you'll be amazed by like we were like 10, 20 people, and then we were handling like um, crores of payments that are coming into the ecosystem, right? I mean, you would not be able to realize that aspect if you had not worked on that
Mm.
particular forefront to actually see it happen. So I mean, that was a huge thing for me to actually realize from an engineering standpoint, that you don't need to actually over engineer and do a lot of stuff around it to actually uh, it is all about the idea that counts, and then how you execute it in the end. So I think for me that was like a huge moment of realization on how
Nice.
things happen even from an engineering standpoint.
On that same note, I mean, what you're talking about is very early in the payment ecosystem for India, especially. Even though now, when we look back, we look at ourselves as a very mature, in some ways, way more advanced than many other countries in the world, right? But even in those early days, I think it was still a lot yet to be done. So, since you mentioned engineering challenges, how was it working with the rest of the ecosystem, right? The the banks in those days, the state in which they were in, I'm sure half the APIs didn't exist that they exist today. So, what was did you have to innovate and learn things from scratch? Tell us a little bit about those early stories, if you can.
So this is how I look at that aspect. Like, so we exist because in a certain aspect of things, banks are not able to some aspect of how you can drive the whole ecosystem around the financial space, right? So and it is mostly about how you try to use those sort of APIs, or those sort of, I think when we started, I think payouts, I think there was like, we were probably the first sort of clients that we were trying to integrate the whole payouts API. So, and that was very entirely new, right? So even for the banks, they were trying out POCs for us, right? So we integrating and then trying out and then things failing, right? So, and this happens in a lot of new things that come around. You would see a lot of BNPLs that come around. You would see a lot of new wallets that came around. So all these things that when they come around, it sort of involves a lot of initial players, or like the patient zero, to actually try it out and then see
Yeah.
how it works, right? And in sort of a lot of cases, what happens is that we end up documenting it for them, right? So that is how, from an
Yeah.
engineering standpoint, it always evolves. And they come to us and ask, do you have do you have any documentation on this for our thing? So we have had those sort of scenarios wherein the party that we integrated with came to us and said, like, do you have the docs for this? Another client wants to integrate it, right? So
Nice.
it sort of works like that, in the aspect that people want to get out things faster, so APIs and things may not be there, or that's from an engineering standpoint, it sort of involves like, get out the product, get it done, then use it, and then see how it evolves. So I think it sort of starts out with the MVP, what can be done and what can be
Nice.
evolved. So and a lot of problems around how the banking ecosystem itself, right? So there will be APIs which does not talk about um, error codes. All right, there will be APIs that does not say that which version they are using, right? So you'll try out your APIs in your UAT environments, and then once you go to production, it's like, oh, our APIs, the version of our APIs are different in production. So we go the whole route again and then do it again. So I
Wow.
mean, you end up breaking stuff. I mean, in some point of, but for us to have that seamlessly given out to customers, and that's how we try to do it. So I mean, it's always to fail fast and then deliver it fast. So yeah.
Nice. No, I think the ecosystem has definitely learned from a lot of these early, versions of trials and errors that you guys probably have done with them. And I would say it's caught up quite a bit and innovated quite a bit. Puneet, if I were to ask you similarly, right? I mean, you had a view of the payment ecosystem a little bit, being at another early payments company. You of
Right.
course saw the various gaps in the market that a company like Cashfree could also fill. What were some of the early things that apart from the payout product you mentioned? Uh, what kind of other things did you guys have to do? I mean, one is, how do you get a small startup mm, to be? How do you get your first customers to sort of put faith in you as a new payments player, and that too payments being such an integral part of anyone's stack, right? Do you have? Can you share some interesting stories from then?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I think, one of the major challenges that I faced as a sales guy initially was that when you work at a brand or a company which people know about,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
very easy to sell. In a way, at least people recognize that what you are selling and who you are representing. But when you are a new startup, right, and with a space which is payments, where people have to trust with their business's money that you will handle it and you will give it back to them safely, that's a very different scenario altogether.
Yeah.
So I think these were some of very big initial struggles, because the biggest thing was to make people trust. And so that was obviously there. And what I used to do is that somewhere it's I mean, as a sales guy, it's about how you build a rapport with people and how you build that relationship. And that's what I always played with in for the first couple of years for the company, because I knew that that's something that the merchants would expect and clients would expect. And yes, plus the other thing was that any friends or any people in my network who were starting up something new or who already had a use case for online payments, I made sure that if there are 10 such people, I converted all of those 10. And right, I mean, whatever it took for me to be up whole night to give them that experience that someone is there taking care of things for them, right, replying to emails within 2 minutes. I think for first 2 years there was hardly one email, I mean, not even a single email where I would have not replied within 2 minutes any time of the day.
Wow.
So I mean, I'm sure that not just me, but the team also went to such lengths to ensure that we win the trust of people. And I think first, initially, once we had first set of our customers, it was more of word of mouth,
Right.
because that's how that got us the next set of clients. And another very interesting thing that we did was to go after certain industries where we were really solving pain points for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say, consider for example, there were a couple of nascent industries at that point of time, like say gaming, for example, one of the industries, right? Or even say, for that matter, e-commerce, where refunds were a
Right.
problem. So we started reaching out to those category of merchants where I identified very specific pain points and which our products were able to solve for them. So there was no competition. So
Right.
I mean, if you are giving them something which no one else is offering and which clearly takes care of some of their pains, they would want to try out even if it's a new player, right?
Right.
So I think that was another thing where we started off with something by always solving for a pain point and later trying and get their larger pie of their business. Because once you solve for their real pain point, which no other bigger player is solving for, they trust with you with other parts of their businesses. I think that helped us a lot
Very true.
in the initial days.
No, very true. And you mentioned as a salesperson, right? I mean, obviously, even at the early days, I think everyone in the team is selling in some ways. Just like everyone in
Yes,
the team is
absolutely.
also doing customer support, and just everyone is doing something or the other. To both of you, over the many years that you've been here now, what are the different sort of roles you've taken on? And especially with this happens with all early folks in a startup. You might be a specialist in one thing, but you end up wearing many hats. So what are some of those roles which either of you have done? Puneet, if you want to continue.
Sure. So I started off as a sales guy, and then slowly, as the team and our client base started growing up, I started taking care of the entire customer success teams
Wow.
also, because that I was the only customer success guy at that point of time also. So I would have one phone for client calls and the other one for customer support calls, which will be client support. So I'll take care of both of them. And then slowly I would use my past experiences from my previous organizations to build up new much needed verticals at Cashfree. Like for example, sales, while I was initially the single sales guy, but then I have to bifurcate it into multiple functions like an inbound
Right.
sales. Then you have to also have a CRM in place, right? So make sure you identify right vendors, integrate with them, right? Then you set up the entire onboarding, merchant onboarding flows, which is an ops job.
Yep.
So I've taken care of the entire ops initially, customer support, sales, and in fact, I mean, apart from that, I've also taken care of product also largely around payouts very actively, to because to identify use cases and what exactly should be the product to help them solve for those use cases, right?
Right.
So these are some of the larger,
Wow.
like
Nice.
things that I've taken care of. Yeah.
No, wonderful. And again, Joe, I imagine the same sort of span across all sort of technical roles, or tell us about what hats you've had to wear.
Right. From so a lot of roles within engineering itself,
Right.
but also outside. I think I have also gone for multiple sales pitch
Of
with
course.
multiple merchants that we had to do. I had to. I think early on, I was. I think from an operation standpoint, the new features you build, you are also the sole operation guy for that
Yes.
particular feature that you build,
Yes.
right? So that is a given. I mean, probably that was not something you said like you had to do. It was something that you had to take care. That was a given,
Yeah.
right? Right, from an engineering standpoint, a lot of roles within engineering, I think DBA, I mean development is the obvious thing. IT guy, the infrastructure, DevOps, these are all the sort of I think we had considerable amount of times until we hired for those sort of roles, I think. Right, so there used to be a time wherein you had to handle product, DBAs, and then infrastructure, and then IT, right? Even like setting up VPNs and
Wow.
setting up it for everyone, right? So um, somebody had to do it, and then I mean, I pitched in. We should help out where we
Of
can
course.
facilitate, right? So that being the idea, I think for a huge time, I think I was also the operation standpoint for refunds. I mean, which is a very
Hmm.
very big pain point in the payment ecosystem as itself. So, I mean, that was I just took some time of the day to actually look at how we are
Wow,
dealing
that
with
would have been
refunds
a
and to actually
you'd have to
see.
switch your personality for that. I imagine through the day. But
Right.
on a lighter note, like if I were to ask you guys, both of you, you've spent so much time now in the company and the ecosystem overall. If I just asked you, like, knowing all of this that you've done, and what would you ever have thought of being in any other industry? Is there a view of the world that you probably had as an alternate career path for yourselves ever?
Should I
Either of
go?
you? Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Right. So I think probably I'm not sure if it's related. So I think I've heard this Riju say multiple times. So I think when I joined Cashree, one of the aspects that I saw was that everyone was into football. Right. So I was too much into football also. Right. So I think Riju at some point say like this is very cultural fit. We should look at
Nice.
this as a cultural fit. Right. I think Punit also does that. I think everyone plays. I mean, we take specific time of the day to actually go and play every week. A lot. I
Wow.
mean, that used to happen a lot. Right. So I was too much into football. I mean, I watch and play, and then I game also on it. So I was thinking if I should do something else, I should do football. But I'm too. I mean, from a fitness standpoint, I'm just bad at it. So. Uh, I can just
Okay. Okay, that's
ask for
good
it,
to
but
know.
I will not. I will not probably get it. But yeah, it's too competitive of a career, I would say.
Well, everything is, I guess, but that's good to know. Puneet, do you share the same sort of ambitions? I know it's like now I've heard that it's a big culture fit for the company, but what about you? Have you ever thought of a alternate path?
So if I asked this question to my dad, he would have said that you should have never done this. You should have joined the family business. Good, I
Of course.
didn't. And but yeah, I think I have been very passionate about cricket. I mean, right from my childhood, and to till date also, I make sure that I at least play once a week. And yeah, I mean, probably I would have played, maybe if not for the national team, at least for the some IPL team. But good that this happened.
Wow. Wow. That's, I mean, you, both of you have really uh, maybe left behind some illustrious careers in sports from the sound of it. But I'm sure the company and everyone else is fortunate to have you guys here. On that note, like, again, since we're talking personal lives, clearly sports is a big factor. But what about everything else? Like, it's very hard to sort of also have downtime, I understand, in a startup even when the company has grown bigger. But what do you guys do for fun? Do you have recommendations when it comes to books, movies, podcasts for that matter, since we're on one. Do you guys listen to podcasts? It's my standard question I ask almost everyone I speak to. So, do you? Yes, no, and do you have recommendations or anything recently that you've read or heard or watched? Puneet, why don't you go?
Yeah. So, so I am when I have to, like switch off and take some time off. My thing is to travel, and I am a mountain person. So whenever I really
Nice.
want to take some time off, and whenever I have gotten a chance at Cashfree also, that's one thing that I have definitely done, right? And yeah, I love watching movies, and uh, so if I say genre or the kind of movie that I've really loved, I mean, one of the favorite movies has been The Dark Knight, one of all-time favorites for me. And I do enjoy
Nice.
music a lot. I do always like listen to music. I always keep my playlist updated. It also
Oh,
circulates in my friend circle. So very fond of those couple of things.
wow, nice. That's great to know. I mean, I think again, Bangalore has that advantage of being giving you access to mountains also. So if you wanted to, so that's good. All right, great. Joe, what about you?
So I think probably so I never used to be a travel person before. I think before COVID probably, but I sort of want to travel at this point in time. So